and welcome to this another episode of ECCB Connects. Remember, ECCB Connects is produced by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to share with you who we are, what we do, and how we serve you. Today we have with us Governor Mr. Timothy N.J. Antoine, and we'll be talking about the recent increases in banking fees and charges. Governor, welcome to ECCB Connects.
Thank you, Shamalan. It's great to be back.
Governor, last week, 20th May, we noted the public's response to RBC's announcement of increases in its fees and charges. What does the ECCB have to say to the public at this time?
Well, Shamalan, we're very concerned about the possible or the likely impact of any increases in bank fees and charges on our depositors, especially the smaller ones. The reality is that we have for many years encouraged people to save. We've encouraged persons to invest and to enter the banking system. And we're concerned that the increase in fees of any bank, so I'm not focusing on a particular bank, but any bank, can in fact result in depositors, especially the smaller ones, losing savings, because if you have a savings account and maybe you're not to be able to add much and you're getting a charge every month, you're actually losing your savings. So that's a concern, loss of savings and the incentive to save, because all of a sudden you're not feeling that if you add in, you're subtracting. So we're concerned about the potential loss of real savings, but also the incentive to save. We're also concerned about lack of access to the payment system. As a developing region, and we want to have more and more people in the payment system, in the formal system, to transact business. That's a sign of development. So we would be concerned that these things can encourage people to go back to investing below their mattress and their pants and so on. That is not desirable. So we are concerned about the impact. But more than that is on economic development. We do not want to see a situation where our people are debanked. They don't feel they have access to the financial system because of barriers such as fees and charges. So we are definitely concerned about this situation. And my advice at this moment to our depositors would be to weigh very carefully your options. Look to see what institutions offer what products and what best meets your needs, because this particular institution may not be best for you, but another one might be. So you need to look at everybody and see what works for you. You also need to think about what your plans are in terms of where you want to go, your financial goals, and keep that in mind and figure out who can best help you go forward with your plans and your goals. Some institutions might be better for big business, some might be better for small business, some might be better for large depositors, some might be better for small depositors. So you really have to look at what's available and make a decision very carefully and very thoughtfully. And that's why we really feel that the banks have to give more information. We want to encourage them to be more transparent, because to make that decision, our depositors need to have as much information as possible at their disposal. So we are very concerned, and obviously we want the banks to be reasonable with their fees as much as possible. And what we're asking the banks to do is to give the depositors in particular options to either minimize or avoid these fees. If you can't avoid, minimize, but give them the option. Let them know. They need a little counseling, a little advice, so that they can make the best decisions possible in the situation.
But we've been noticing the long lines. I mean, persons are taking steps to protect their savings by withdrawing their funds from the bank. Is this something that's desirable?
No. Well, I mean, people have a choice, and if they seek their funds, those funds are made available. My concern would be, where are they taking these funds to? If they're taking it to another bank or some other financial institution, well, that's their right and choice. My concern is that they're taking it and they're not putting it back in the system. That would be a concern, because there's potential possibility for loss, a risk of loss and so on, and we want to minimize that. We also want people to be calm. There's no, the banks are liquid. They have cash, so it's not as if if you go, you will get your money. But do you really want it back? And if you want it back, do you want to put it? In some cases, you may find that you have multiple accounts across the banking system. And this may be an opportunity to do some consolidation. So instead of having 4 accounts, you may have 2 accounts. Right? So you don't want to put your eggs in one basket. That's the general rule of diversification. But you don't want to spread yourself too thin, because the more you spread yourself, the more fees and charges that you're paying. So you may find that you want to consolidate a little bit, put it in fewer institutions. And of course, where you put it depends on what is being offered, what fees and charges, what products, what meets your needs. So all I would say about the lines is that people need to understand that their funds are safe, and that they need to be calm and look at what works for them. Don't just follow the crowd. Think about your personal situation, what is best for you in that situation, and figure out which institution best serves your needs. And once you've made that decision, then you can move your money if you need to move your money.
Remain calm, think things through, but I'm sure there are persons out there who are saying, I'm not going to take that chance. I'm losing on my savings. I'm still going to the bank to take out my money.
There's no need for people to get overly, excited. Let's be thoughtful. At the end of the day, we make our best decisions when we're clear, when we're thoughtful, when we reasoned, and we have a plan. So let's be smart, let's have a plan, and let's go through. I want, again, to encourage the commercial banks to do a better job of explaining to customers what it is that's available to them, why they're doing what they're doing, and what are the options to minimize or avoid these charges. I think that's an obligation that the banks have. And certainly a lot more public education is required. Because in some cases, even though they may have published the information in the bank in a month in advance, people seem not to have been aware. And even if they were aware that the fees are being changed, they seem not to know their options. And to me, you need to know your options. So I want to encourage the banks to do that. But again, I say to the currency union, the citizens, the depositors, that the banks are liquid. They have cash, so it's a question of figuring out where you want to put your cash.
I know that the ECCB does not have the legal authority to regulate banking fees and charges, but as regulator of commercial banks, the people are expecting the ECCB to intervene on their behalf in this matter.
Right, so I need to clear that up, because I think a lot of people were under the impression that the central bank regulates bank fees and charges. The central bank has no powers in law to do that. If we did, we would have acted. We do not have those powers. Now, so let me explain what the central bank, what we can do. The only rate that the law gives the central bank powers to regulate is a minimum savings deposit rate. That is the rate you get on your savings account. That is set by the Monetary Council. That is right now at 2%, which is still, although it was reduced a year ago, it is still among the highest in the Caribbean. In fact, I only believe that 2.5% is higher than the ECCU. Right? In many other countries, it is 0, or there's just no minimum rate. So some people are getting less than 1%, close to 0. In the ECCU, you still get 2%. That's the only rate that the central bank regulates, Article 34 of the agreement. Everything.
And the banks can't touch that.
The banks cannot touch that. The ECCB, determines that rate, and we do it at the highest level, at the level of the Monetary Council. That's the only rate. Everything else, there are no price controls on fees and charges. Now, the other thing I should mention, since I'm on it, is that in terms of a lending rate, most countries have what is called a usury law, which basically sets the maximum you could charge on lending, loans, and so on. So in many countries, it's 16% or 18%. But the central bank only has powers to regulate the minimum saving rate. And that's what we do. Now, in terms of what else since we are concerned, what else can we do or are we doing? We have encouraged all of our banks to be very transparent with these fees, to fully disclose what your fees are, so that information, people can look and decide for themselves whether this is the bank that they want to do business with. Information. We also say to our banks, if you're going to change fees, then you need to send us information about what's the basis for changing these fees. No, we can't dictate the fees, but we can ask questions. And we do. And we also say that you need to make sure that you give customers sufficient notice. So if in fact you're going to raise your fees, the customers can decide whether or not they want to stay in those arrangements. And if they want to seek alternative arrangements, including alternative institutions. So what we do is we say, be transparent, fully disclose, give prior notice, and give a reasonable basis. Now, I suspect that a lot of customers do not have sufficient information. And I think the banks have to do a better job on that. Yes.
Now, Governor, the Banking Act, which governs the operations of the ECCB, that act was recently revised, and I know you said that the bank doesn't have the legal authority to regulate fees and charges at the bank. But with the recent revision, was any consideration given to changing that?
Well, that was before my time, but I think some consideration was given to having, so under the old Banking Act, there was no reference to fees, banking fees and charges. Basically, the banks did as they pleased. Under the new banking law, banks are required to notify the central bank. And the central bank can ask of the banks a justification or a basis for the proposed change or increases in fees and charges. Now, the law says the central bank can ask the bank, explain to me why you are increasing these fees. But the law does not say that the central bank can say, no, do not increase the fees. So it's an inquiry, but there's no enforcement powers to say, if we do not agree, you cannot proceed. What are the real issues that arises from all of this is the need for some consumer protection. And I think, in fact, this is something that the central bank is looking at right now. How we can, in other words, if a customer has complaints about a bank, or bank fees, charges, or bank conduct in general, where do they go? And there is a proposal on the table to have set up a financial ombudsman, some office where people could go and complain, because the truth is that office is not the central bank. The law doesn't really provide for the central bank to do consumer protection. So it's kind of narrow. It focuses on supervision and regulation of banks. But we believe there is need for some kind of consumer protection function and a supporting legislation, so that if customers, depositors have a concern, borrowers, whatever, have a concern with their banks, or any financial institution for that matter, they can go. In some countries, you have a financial ombudsman. So you can actually go there, file complaints, and your complaints can be addressed and hopefully resolved. So the Monetary Council thinking at the moment, based on recommendations approved, is that that might very well take place in a vehicle called the Eastern Caribbean Financial Services Commission, which is to be set up in the future. So that's the thinking at this stage. But to be in sum, the law says the central bank, the new law says the central bank can ask, what is the basis for the fees? But the law does not say the central bank can say no. In other words, it stops short of inquiry. And that's what we do. So we do ask for explanations, but we are not in a position to stop people if we feel their fees are unreasonable.
But what else is being done to assist the public with this?
Well, one of the things that is also actually being pursued right now is so just to be clear, the Monetary Council, which is the highest decision-making body of the bank, made up of all the ministers of finance in the ECCU, has discussed this issue. And as recent as last November, agreed to set up a working group to look at this issue, to examine this issue. So that working group has been constituted. We expect that working group will be doing its work and will then file a report, findings and recommendations to the Monetary Council. And one of the other recommendations is for the Bankers Association in the ECCU to kind of agree amongst themselves on a range of fees and publish those, so that there's full transparency, they are reasonable, and everybody knows what exists and can make decisions accordingly. So those are also recommendations that have been approved by the Monetary Council. And the central bank has advised the Bankers Association of the Council's decisions.
We've been noticing the increase in these fees for the past 3-4 years. What is really driving this need to increase the fees? Yeah,
that's a very good question, actually. Several issues, several reasons. First of all is the issue of compliance. I think we know a lot now about money laundering and financing of terrorism, and the need for banks to have protocols in place for anti-money laundering and combating financing terrorism. Those costs, those compliance arrangements cost money. I was speaking to a major banker in the region last week while I was in Jamaica, and he was saying to me that across their banking business, they've had to hire around 100 people, 120 people for compliance in the last few years. Now these people have to be paid. But if they don't do that, they're going to get blacklisted, or they're going to find that they get the risk, which is corresponding banks will be lost. So compliance costs for banks have increased significantly. That's one reason. Secondly, technology costs. Banks are required to be competitive, to stay with the modern age. They have to continually upgrade their IT systems, right? The online platforms, their platforms in the bank to make it more available, accessible for customers. Those cost. Then there's the cost of fraud. You may have heard from time to time of people's credit cards getting breached or compromised. Banks have lost millions of dollars because of fraud, right? Those cost the bank. So they have to put in new systems to fight fraud and hacking and so on. They have to put in systems to replace funds lost. So those are things that the banks are facing. And then another very important reason, which we often don't remember, is non-performing loans. The non-performing loans or bad loans in our banking sector is too high. They are around 17% in the ECCU. They ought to be no more than 5%. So they triple what they should be. What does that mean for a bank? It means that the interest income that the bank should be getting from performing loans, they're not getting. Because if the loan is bad, they're not earning on those loans. So that has driven down the profitability of banks. So while costs are rising, income is falling and profitability is falling. And that has resulted in the banks looking for additional ways. I'm not saying I agree with everything, but looking for additional ways now to supplement their income because of these bad loans. All right? So there's also a direct link there. To the extent that the non-performing loans go down, then I think there'll be less incentive or less desire or pressure on banks to want to increase these fees and charges. But at the moment, non-performing loans are also high. So those are some of the factors. But I really feel the banks need to be explaining these things. You know, they are in the seat. They know these things far better than I do. I have a sense. And I think they need to just engage their customers on what it is that they're dealing with so that customers better understand the current realities in the banking system.
You're watching ECCB Connects, protecting our currency, developing our region. And now for this week's financial tip.
Hi, I'm Latricia from Antigua, and I am a graduate of the ECCB Savings and Investments course. Change your attitude towards money. Just like physical fitness, financial fitness requires a change of attitude and the discipline to stick to a plan to get and stay financially fit.
To view any episode of ECCB Connects, anytime, any place, at your convenience, check out our YouTube channel, ECCB Connects.
We've come to the end of another episode of ECCB Connects. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.